Hi and welcome to this video on PrEditor 1.3.3, which is the latest version of PrEditor, which I'm just putting the final touches to. So there's quite a few changes to go through in this version. First thing you'll notice when you run it up is that there have been some changes to the UI. Gone are the old dials, and instead we have a large display here with the parameter names. We can click on the row here and that will bring up our options. Down below here we have custom names if we've given the parameters custom names for push or push to, and we can just tab along here and enter our parameter names if we wish. And then over to the right here we have a section dedicated to the banking. We've done quite a bit of work on banking, as you can see. So instead of just having the bank number and name, we can now see all of the banks that we have. We can add new banks in the middle now. Previously you could only add banks at the end. We can move banks up and down. And we can also copy the contents of one bank to another if we wish. One other thing we've added here is a zoom control, as the panel has got quite a bit wider in this version and we found it's too big for some smaller screens, so we've added a 80 and 100% switch in there so you can shrink it down if you're working on a smaller screen. So moving on from the interface changes, one of the things that have been added for this version is to do with the mapping of MaxforLive instruments. Now when the developer creates a MaxforLive device, they choose which parameters are available for mapping, which parameters from their device are going to be exposed essentially. And sometimes they choose to make all of them available and sometimes not. So here we're looking at the Fat Analog Kick device, which is one of the devices from the MaxforLive Essentials pack. And like a lot of devices, this has 8 parameters exposed and you can't get a lot of the other stuff that's in the device. So I've added a mode similar to the standard and extended available for live controls, in the fact that when you scan the device now, it'll determine if all of the parameters are exposed or not. If they're not, then it'll create a couple of maps and this button here will become enabled and you'll then be able to switch the device into extended mode. So if I click on that, then you can see that we get a lot more parameters available. You might see a lot of duplicate naming here because obviously these parameters weren't intended to be exposed by the developer. So you can go and rename the parameters if you want, if you're going to be seeing those on push or push to. But other than that, that shouldn't have any effect on what you're doing. So I've tried this out on some of the devices in the packs you can get from Ableton, and that seems to be doing the job for now. But if you come across any devices where it's not behaving as expected, then feel free to drop me a line. So the really exciting bit of functionality that's been added to this latest version of PrEditor is the beginning of the support for multi-mapped devices. Now what I mean by a multi-mapped device is something like Kontact or Reaktor, where it's a single device but it can host a number of different setups or instruments. And so even though it's a single device, each instance of it, whether it be a Kontact instrument or a Reaktor ensemble, can present different parameters to the user and therefore is something that we'd probably want to map in different ways. So this first version with multi-map support is for Kontact and Reaktor. I'll be adding other stuff in the future once this is stabilized, but these are two fairly common things that people use and are quite complex, so kind of getting these two up and running should make the implementation of other stuff fairly straightforward. So as far as the user interface is concerned, if we go to VST here, we see that we have a few options down here. I'm still working on Complete Kontrol, so that's not in yet, but that'll be in an update soon. So the user entry has been replaced by a single entry, and this is where all of our normal devices go here. So anything that isn't MultiMap, which as I say is just Kontact and Reaktor at the moment, will appear here. And then if it is a multi-mapped device, then we'll get a separate entry here, and we can go into that and we can see all of the devices that we can then map. And if we click through these, we'll see all of the parameters and banks available for each of these Reaktor ensembles. So operation is pretty much the same as for other VSTs, apart from how we identify the actual Reaktor devices themselves. So I'm just going to delete this mapping here, and we're going to do that one again shortly. But I'm just going to pop into Live, and I've got Reaktor here, and I'm just going to click on something that wasn't there, that I haven't mapped. So let's go for Echomania. So I'm going to load up Echomania, and you can see that's loaded up, and we've got that up on the push 2 here, which I'm using for demonstration. Obviously this is the same across all of our supported controllers. It's just easier to show on push as it has the lovely display on it. So if I come back over here now, we will have Reaktor Echomania that has been scanned, and we can start mapping stuff. So I'm just going to delete a couple of parameters here and send that to live. And you can see those two have gone, and mine also, and send that to live. And we've renamed those couple of parameters, and I've decided that I don't actually want all of these banks, so that's going to go there. And then so these are custom banks, and send that to live. And you can see now we have our custom bank names, and we have the 4 banks that I've now created. So let's just reset that and get it back to the initial state of the device. And then let's just clear that down so we can see what's going on, and we'll just have 3 parameters here, and we'll send that over to live. So I'm going to go on to the second track now, and I'm going to drop another instance of Reaktor onto there, and this time I'm going to load up something that is slightly different. I'm going to load up Monarch, and if we go back to, we can see that that's loaded up on push here, and we've got our banks of parameters that have automatically been made available. So up until we actually do a custom mapping, then all of the valid parameters for the device are made available to you here, not in any particular order, but all of the parameters that haven't been assigned in the ensemble, or the disabled unused parameters, will all be stripped out. So the only thing you'll see here are valid parameter assignments. If we go here, what's actually happened is that we've got this Reaktor 4729.307.5383 unintelligible string. So what happens is when we scan each ensemble, I give it a unique ID so that we can map and customize that. And some of those IDs I've put into a bank which we'll distribute when this is available, of known mappings. So for instance, the Reaktor factory library is in there, and I've given all of these things IDs, which is why when we double clicked on it, it came up and looked up that ID and named it. In the case of Monarch, I haven't done that, so it's telling us that it's unknown. So this will happen for your own stuff or user stuff from the library, etc. So the first time that happens, you'll get this ID, and obviously you're going to want to know what it's called. So you can just go in and name it yourself, and then the next time you start up PrEditor, you'll be able to see the ensemble by its name rather than by its ID. And once we've done that, then we're clear to go and start mapping things as we wish. We can send that over to live as well. So we've now got Monarch on that track with our custom parameters, and we can go back to Reaktor 6 on this track, and we've got the 3 parameters that I mapped for Echomania. So you can see now that for each ensemble that we have in Reaktor, we can set up our own custom mappings for use on D controllers. So that covers the basics of mapping Reaktor devices, but there is one other thing that we run into with Reaktor. This is actually the same for other VSTs or AUs that have more than 128 parameters, but it's something that's maybe a bit more visible in Reaktor, as it supports 1000 parameters for each ensemble, but Live only allows 128 of those parameters to be mapped. And how it works is that basically when it goes to inquire of Reaktor for the parameters, then the first 128 will be given to Live, and everything with an ID above 128 won't be visible. So we've got a way that we can deal with that. It requires a bit more effort because we're going to have to do some custom mapping of the device in Live, but I'll go through that now. And as I say, this procedure is also relevant to any other VSTs which have more than 128 parameters in them, and therefore you're going to have to select which ones you want to be accessible from Live. Okay, so I'm going to create a new instance of Reaktor. I've loaded up Polyplex because I know that that has about 280 parameters in there, only 128 of which are available. So if I look at the automatic mapping, that's what we've got. Go into here now, pull up VST and Reaktor. We haven't scanned Polyplex yet, and that's because what I did was I changed the auto scan multi to be 0. Now this is on by default, and what that means is that every time you drop in a new Reaktor device or Kontact device, or indeed edit any of the parameter setup for them, it'll scan it and we'll get a new entry here. So being as I'm going to be deleting a lot of parameters in a minute, I don't want it to create an instance per parameter setup. So when we have auto scan multi 0, then we need to hit the scan device, and that'll scan the selected device. So I have this selected with Polyplex in it, and I hit scan device, and now I've got Polyplex there, which is the 128 version of it, and this is the one which I've generated an ID for, so it's recognised this as the default Polyplex as we drop it in. So if I want to get access to some of these other parameters, then what I can do is, let's just see, so we've got that, we can see that that one's there and all of these around. But I know that if we go on to the global FX, then this is where we kind of start to hit the limit. I don't think those are mapped, so we've got that, and the holds have made it in, but the things like amounts here, so none of these are mappable in the default setup for Polyplex, because they didn't fit into the 128 here. So I'm going to create a new mapping. I'm going to go there and I'm simply going to delete all of the controls here, and we're going to start from fresh. Be nice if there was a delete all somewhere. Maybe there is and I don't know about it, and someone's going to tell me after watching this video. Which would be great because I spend a lot of time doing this. Okay, so we've now got rid of all of those. So say we were on the main sheet and we did want to map these anyway because they're useful things to have. So we'll map those. And let's do that for sound 2 as well. And that's what we wanted in our mapping, but then we wanted to go into global effects and we wanted to map some of these. So we couldn't use these earlier, but now Live has let us put these into the mapping, and they're now in the device here. So we can go and now come back into here and we can hit scan device. And we could go up to here and we can see that we've got a new ID that's been generated. So I'm going to call that Polyplex Min for a minimum setup. So if we have a look at push now, we can see that we have our default mapping created. So we've got all of the 16 parameters assigned to the banks, so we can modify those parameters which were previously out of scope, and we can now go and do our PrEditor stuff on those. So if we just want to level 1, level 2, let's go F3 amount, F4 amount, oops, F4 amount, send that over to Live. Then we've got our custom names, as you can see, and then we can go and do all of our normal stuff. So if I want to actually decide that I want to spread these out more, I can go and start putting some stuff on bank 3 and bank 4 as per usual, and send that across to Live, and then I've got my 4 banks. So using this method you can get access to 128 parameters of your choosing for any device and then map them in PrEditor. Obviously if you then save these setups yourself, then you can, kind of drag these in, and every time PrEditor sees this particular configuration for Reaktor 6, then it's going to auto map that particular instance. So that covers mapping the parameters beyond 128 that are automatically available with our populate all parameters option set to -1. There is one other thing worth mentioning, and this is the reason I started looking into Polyplex actually, is the fact that, again, as with MaxforLive parameters, it's up to the developer of the ensemble what they actually choose to make available. Now, I can't do what I do with MaxforLive devices, unfortunately, but what I've included in PrEditor is a little patch which will help you determine what's available. So this MXF is included. So basically if we hit load, then this is going to ask us for an instance of a plugin, and we're going to load up Reaktor 6 here. If we click open, and then I'm going to load Polyplex. Thanks very much to Native Instruments for letting me have a copy of Reaktor 6 for testing of PrEditor. Okay, so once we've got that loaded, then I'm just going to move that out, and I'm going to open up the Max window here, and I'm going to empty that down, and I'm just going to hit params. And basically what this has dumped out now is every parameter in this ensemble that has been assigned an ID that can be mapped. So you can see there's 238 of them. You can see the ones that we were mapping actually just with this lot here. So as you can see, they're above the 128 cutoff, which is why these didn't appear to start with. But once I'd got rid of all the other parameters, then I could map those. So the reason I did this, I was looking into something for one of my testers, and they were saying I'd like to be able to map these. So I kind of had a little play around, and I couldn't find any way of mapping them, so I wrote this little utility, and lo and behold, they haven't been assigned an ID. So basically, whatever the situation with the 128 parameters, and mapping those into live, if the parameter in your ensemble isn't listed by this utility, then you're just not going to be able to map that into live in the first place, and obviously you're not going to be able to use PrEditor then. So at that point, I would suggest either contacting the developer of the particular ensemble, or if you're familiar with Reaktor, then maybe open up the patch yourself and try and assign the stuff that you want mapping to an ID that can then be exported into live. Hopefully that gives you an overview of the options available for mapping into Reaktor. Kontact is pretty much the same principle. I guess the only thing to note with Kontact, let me just drag a copy of that into here, is that obviously you can build up racks of instruments here, and these will be mapped individually within PrEditor. I think the best way to show you is to look here. So we've got an empty rig here, so this is easier to see if I open these up. So if I drop Alto Sax in here, you can see that's assigned this bunch of parameters essentially for controlling that. Now if I add something else to that, I've now got 32 parameters here, and that will have been mapped by PrEditor as a separate entity, because we've now got 32 parameters, and that will appear as a separate thing. So I can get rid of those two, and now if I just drop that on there, then you can see that we've got our 16 parameters again. And if I now drop this in here, now we're back to 32 parameters, but they're in a different order. So baritone followed by alto, if you wanted to map this in PrEditor, is seen as a different entity to alto followed by baritone. And this will go the same as you add more items into Kontact, and it fills up these parameters. They'll each generate unique instances for PrEditor, which can be individually mapped. So that covers the first step of the multi-map support. As I say, I'm going to be getting this out there hopefully in the next few days, and going to see how this settles over the next couple of weeks, and then once I find out all the issues with this, then I'll be moving on to support Komplete Kontrol and other things. I've been asked to look at Diva and the audio modder stuff, so I'm going to progress with some of those things once the main system is working. What I would like to ask is that obviously there's hundreds of ensembles and there's hundreds of different configurations for Reaktor and Kontact, so there are probably going to be cases which I haven't dealt with, so if you do find various combinations that don't behave as expected, then please just get in contact with support at Isotonik and I'll work through those issues. If you could also read the documentation update that comes with this version, it lists a set of files which I'm going to need from you in order to investigate things. So if you could read through those instructions, and if you are entering a support request, then please provide those files, and it'll allow me to start looking at the issue as soon as possible. So have fun with these latest updates, let us know how it goes. And so if you do have instruments, devices similar to how Kontact and Reaktor work, then you can send a mail again to support and suggest that we add those to a future update of PrEditor. Okay, thanks for watching and have fun.